Hello, everyone. Um, we are dialing here from St. Gallen, Front Fire headquarters. I'm Hugo. We're gonna be here perhaps one more minute as everybody comes in. Barr is just dialing in. Anna is just here now. We have everyone, which is good. We will do a little bit of housekeeping before, but I think we're probably gonna give another 1 minute before we start in earnest here. In the meantime, of course, thanks everybody for being here. Nice to see the numbers coming through. And also, I know that there will be some people watching this later. So, to the ones that are catching this up on recording, hello as well. Um, right. As we approach a nice number here for us of people, let me just start kicking off. We are now, this is the last episode of this series for this year. We're just wrapping up 2025 on this. We will continue this format probably throughout next year with some changes in terms of like how we actually expand into the subjects we already started, probably making it a little bit more, I don't know, more deep and more complex in terms of how we go through it, which is exciting for us. For those that are here for the first time, this is the Rebranding Trend series. It's something that also, even for ourselves here, we notice a bunch of times here in Frenchify how much rebranding seems to be a topic that people is like the interesting brand spikes during that period that companies go through restructuring or rebranding like that. But even for us here, honestly, we are starting to think about is that term even appropriate? Because I think we see less and less of the big ribbon cutting, rebranding, tada moment, and it's more brands in constant evolution. So we will continue exploring this and seeing how the series evolves next year. But this is thank you for now for being here for this series with us. Um, I housekeeping here just so for who those that don't use Zoom very much as well, like me. There are two modes here that you might see. There is usually chat and Q&A. I think today we're gonna really focus on the chat and not the Q&A, which means that you can during the presentation just bring up your thoughts. I'll keep a look at it, and then towards the end when we open up to some questions, which I hope we're gonna have plenty of time for to bring your thoughts and your the questions you put in there. I'll be keeping an eye on it. So that is that. And who is me? Who am I? I'm Hugo. I'm a creative director here at Frontify. Dialing in from Switzerland today. I've been here for 2 years now, leading not only the way we speak, but also our own brand. It's a unique situation where we not only have to talk about brands, but we have our own to build. And this is part of my job here. And today we're going to talk about culture, but most importantly, the relationship, of course, between brand and culture. We're gonna, I think, define a little bit what is cultural relevancy or literacy, how that comes about, and I think that probably we see as observers of the industry as well, a bunch of brands that try to play that game and get it right, brands that play that game and get it wrong, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about that today. There is something for me like that from the beginning by the nature of the product that we are, Frontify. We used to speak to our customers. We speak quite a lot about consistency, but it's a fun term nowadays because I think we're a little bit post consistency, really, or at least that consistency of form that we used to have. I don't think that's what brands are following so much anymore. And perhaps if we're going to speak about consistency, it's more consistency of behavior, or you can be consistently brave or consistently provocative or consistently bold, but not necessarily always the same, right? And in that also there is something here to think about strategy, because you can build all of those strategies, but then the real world happens. You try to interact with culture as it is out there, and then what happens with how the strategy kind of gets eaten up by culture is also something that it was in our mind when we invited Anna and Barr to come here and talk to us about this. So in short, how to navigate cultural change, avoid missteps perhaps, and embrace cultural intelligence is what we're talking about here today. So let me introduce the two speakers we have today, and then I'll pass on to Anna to kick it off for us. So first, I'll do a bit of reading, and I know that sometimes you do a bit of reading. Seems like you am I reading this for the first time? And not at all. I follow Anna's work for a long time. I think that the Substack that she has, the Sociology of Business, is brilliant. For those who don't know it, I think is a really good destination and a good platform of other voices as well, including Barr sometimes. so that we can kind of really see what's happening in that arena. But not only that, Substack, and I was before, I think most recently Chief Brand Officer at Esprit and Banana Republic as well. She connects brands and business through culture, is what says here. And of course, it'll be evident during this how that works. She also is the author of Hitmakers, How Brands Influence Culture and the Business of Aspiration. She was named Forbes Most Entrepreneurial CMO, one of the most influential entrepreneurial CMOs. And not only that, PhD in sociology, which is really impressive. So very happy to have Anna here. I will run through also Barr's biography here, and then we can kind of jump straight into the speakers. Barr, met recently Barr, and I think I just already fell in love with his agency, Parallel Play, doing really good work with partnerships, with collaborations with Hinge, A24, both, but also Perfectly Imperfect, which is really cool to see what's happening in that space. Before that, Barr was the first hire at Ruby for fans of hibiscus water. Really good to check it out. And I know that during his time there, he was really doing a bunch of work in terms of building a world, which you can see how he took that and really built that into Parallel Play to run his own agency there, which is really about growth through cultural intelligence. So very happy to have both of you here. Thank you both for being with us today. And Anna, please, I'll pass it on to you.
Well, first I want to acknowledge some comments over here because they like some of them. Leo came here from through sociology or business, and yeah. So hi, Leo, thanks, and some others as well. So love that you guys organized this, and thanks for having us here, and thanks Barr for being game to do this with me. So in terms of context, I like this format. When Frontify approached me, I thought it was both timely and relevant to have this sort of session, because in my work with brands, I work as transformational chief brand officer. I'm less of an operational one. Operational ones are those when times are good, they can kind of steer ship in steady waters. I'm the chief brand officer that changes things internally and externally. So that means that at Banana Republic and Esprit, the latter was a global role, the former was North America focused, is first transform your organizations. What is the brand strategy, brand creative, cultural influence? So internal reorganization to be more adaptable to changing culture. And then externally transforming how those brands interact with culture, how they become more adaptable, more nimble, but above all, how do you take that intention when the brands were created originally 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and adapt them for 2025, 2026 and beyond aesthetically, strategically, creatively, and connect that creativity with business growth. So that is basically the crux of what I do. How do you define the cultural narrative overall? What is the brand's role in culture? How does a brand contribute to culture? Which subculture does it connect with? What is that story that the brand tells over extended period of time? And then the second phase, what are the cultural products that the brand tells that story, which specifically means brands used to influence culture through mass media, through TV, through PR, to print, throughout the home and so on. They still influence through mass media, but more importantly, how brands influence culture today are through cultural products they create, through collaborations, through merch, through events, through content they create, through basically fandoms, through entertainment, to small snippets of content, and overall how they advertise themselves, to trailers, to kind of like how they prepare, how they slowly influence culture repeatedly, not releasing their advertisements at the same time as they release their products, but kind of how they follow the zeitgeist, how they influence the zeitgeist, how to recognize the zeitgeist, how they see it in many different niches and subcultures, their messages, their content, their ideas at the end of the day in order to achieve business results. So basically what cultural programming is a strategy of cultural influence that uses cultural products to achieve business results. Then the third part of that entire cultural programming is, so we go from cultural narrative told to cultural products, can be product reboots, hero product, archive reissues, through cultural programming, which means how to connect all those cultural products with contexts where those cultural products are going to be seeded for the best results. Not all cultural contexts are going to be equally fertile grounds, and that's the test and learn approach that is so foreign right now. And this is not theory. We have done that at Banana Republic. We have done that at Esprit, when the media planning is not done in the year, when it's done a much shorter time horizons. And you basically allocate a media budget and you say, hey, let's try to target these audiences, and let's try not just think about what are prospect customers, but let's see who are the cultural observers, cultural critics, cultural commentators that we need to reach in order to achieve desired results. And then finally is coordination of cultural calendars with marketing calendar, product calendars, promotional calendars, commercial calendars at the end of the day. So these are sort of 4 stages of the overall cultural programming. So against this wider strategic backdrop, Barr is going to present how do we first and foremost recognize those cultural tensions that inform the narrative, that informs the center of gravity, center of cultural gravity for brands, that attracts collaborators, that attracts the audience to the brand, that attracts culture to the brands. And what are those sources of tension? Through specific examples that can inform your own work and thinking about how you can, in your brands or the brand you work for, influence culture. And throughout this presentation, we can also stop and inject, and towards the end, save your questions and we can have a discussion. So Barr, the floor is yours.
Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much for the intro, and thank you so much for having us. I just want to say a quick thank you to the Frontify team for having this. Earlier this year, Anna and I put together a reading list series for Frontify that we had a lot of fun with. We talked about how to beat slop and building an otaku style fandom around your brand. And so it's really great to be back and kind of presenting this context. A lot of those reading lists, I think, are also really helpful context for the presentation we're about to do. So I don't have a ton of time, so I'm going to kind of try to run through. So our presentation today is called What It Takes to Earn Cultural Currency Today. And so I know a lot of the people who are here and who RSVP'd really think about brand at a very operational level. Guidelines, design systems, assets, toolkits. And what we want to do for the little while, that we have is really zoom out and look at, what all of that is ultimately in service for, which is how your brand shows up in culture and frankly, like whether anyone actually cares. So the core question we're really trying to answer is, why do some brands end up setting the tone for their category? Why do they get copied, memed? Why do they, get to do fun collaborations? While other brands with the same media spend, similar tools and resources, why do they become flattened and reduced to content, in quotes? And so before we get into the frameworks and case studies, we're going to start by lining up some definitions, just so that everyone's aligned. And so I'll just get into things. So what is cultural currency? It's one of those phrases that really gets thrown around a lot. Sometimes it's just used as a synonym for brand equity. Sometimes it just means, being cool on the internet. For today, I really want to think about cultural currency in actually like a really literal, almost physical way. Cultural currency is a currency like any other currency, like dollars or pounds or Bitcoin or pesos. You can earn it, you can spend it, you can trade it, and if you're not paying attention, you can absolutely lose cultural currency. We define cultural currency as the ability to influence what people talk about, how they behave, and what they come to see as valuable. Um, more specifically, we think, like I said, cultural currency is an asset that lets your brand set reference points in people's heads, what they talk about, how they behave, what they decide is worth their time, money, and social capital. If you have a cultural currency, you have the power to shape taste and the choices in, a favorable direction. Um, Brands, why is cultural currency valuable? Brands with cultural currency have a unique advantage in our climate. Uh, they can, basically they get to play on kind of an easier difficulty setting, so to speak. They can launch things that might look off-brand on paper, whether that's a new product vertical, a new category, a new collaboration, and the audience will stick with them. They will maintain their brand loyalty because they trust the intent of the brand, even if they don't fully get it yet. And when something goes wrong, if a brand, is encountering a crisis or a controversy, brands with cultural currency are more resilient. It's kind of this insurance policy. And, most importantly, cultural currency gives you the right as a brand to move into new spaces without having to re-earn trust from your audience. The market isn't just buying a single SKU from you, it's buying the taste and judgment behind the logo. And we can't talk about taste and judgment with brands without going to the most obvious example, which is A24. So A24 is a great example for this almost because it's too obvious. Obviously, we know them as, the defining kind of indie film studio of the last 2 decades or so, with a very specific taste profile and an obsessive fan base. But, in the last year alone, A24 has launched a theater in New York called the Cherry Lane Theater and a music label, A24 Music. And neither of these things are really surprising to anyone in some ways. And the reason they're not surprising is because A24 has accumulated a ton of cultural currency. These expansions feel like a natural viewpoint, a natural extension of the same point of view that A24 has always had. So we're happy to follow this, the A24 logo into new physical spaces or new product extensions. And we don't really need an explanation to understand why these things make sense. They just do. Um, I mentioned that I want you to think of cultural currency as this kind of asset. And I think it does bring us to this kind of key idea, which is that, you know, you can earn cultural currency, you can spend it, you can exchange it. When it's always in motion. It's a fluid asset. When, you put ideas, products, or experiences into the world that people care enough about to share, remix, or collect, you're earning cultural currency. You spend that currency to extend your relevance. So, A24 and extending to these new categories, they're spending currency that, helps build their moat and helps distinguish them against, a legacy studio, like say a Warner Brothers. And you can exchange cultural currency when you collaborate, co-sign, or lend your brand codes to partners and gain access to their audience. Um, the idea is that this is, again, a dynamic currency that is always fluid, that is always moving, and it's always being repriced based on whether your next move deepens your brand narrative or if it dilutes it. So that brings us to, kind of the title question of our deck, which is how do you earn cultural currency today? Because it's fluid, because it's this dynamic asset, there's no timeless, one size fits all playbook here. The way that we earn real currency, dollars and pounds, changes, right? 10 years ago, the term content creator barely sounded like a real job. And today, more than half of Gen Z says they would become influencers, says, influencers, their top desirable profession. And I think more of them, by survey data, would rather be a YouTuber than an astronaut. The route to relevance is always being rewritten. So instead of a static, checklist or playbook, we need a framework, something flexible that can be plugged into a moment, into your own category, with your own constraints or limitations. The tactics change, but the way you read the room and build your strategy, should stay consistent. So with that in mind, we put together a, sorry, I'm one slide behind. We put together a framework, that is, as kind of a simple, kind of like almost, just way to think about this. And so the framework for how we think brands can earn cultural currency in the moment, is, first capture the moment. That means being really brutally honest about the environment you're operating in. How are people in your space actually discovering things? Are they going through social feeds, search, discords, press, group chats? Who are the real gatekeepers of value? Are they editors, business leaders, creators, niche communities? Before you can shift culture, you need a clean read on, the water you're swimming in. To find your friction. The second move is really around, you know, where can you sit against the moment in a way that feels honest to your brand, or your product. Cultural currency tends to show up where there's tension, where you can challenge a norm of your category rather than just uphold it. A useful question here might be, what expectation can we break, while maintaining our credibility? And third, is build a cultural program. So if you read sociology of business, you'll be very familiar with this term. But, I think of cultural programming, in some ways, it's about taking a lot of shots on goal. Can you take that tension, and turn it into these repeatable moves, drops, new partnerships, new venues, new retail spaces? How does that friction, against the kind of current moment manifest in all these different ways? And over time, these shots on goal, so to speak, kind of compound into cultural currency. So with that in mind, I want to apply our framework, through my own personal lens, and this is really just meant to kind of illustrate how we would operationalize, this framework. It's not meant to be, this defining perspective in any way, not to hedge, but so here's how I kind of like, identify our current moment. I call it, society of the smooth brain. And smooth brain is, if you're not familiar with the term, it really just, kind of refers to this moment where there's not so much thinking that needs to be done. A smooth brain, without wrinkles is one that doesn't, have to engage in too much intellectual exercise. So how do we diagnose the moment? Discovery. We used to hunt for things, whether it was digging through record bins or LimeWire and sketchy MP3 sites. Now we have, Discover Weekly every week is delivering a perfectly curated playlist. Our For You page is showing us new creators and cultural products and brands. There's no effort required to discover. The kind of connection between this, rabbit hole or hunt for artistry or cultural product is no longer present. Cultural discovery is on autopilot. Condition to slop. We talk a lot about slop in our reading list, and I think it's been kind of talked about ad nauseum on Substack and other places. We think of it as this, low effort, high volume content. And I actually don't think of it as necessarily being AI generated. I think humans are just as capable of creating AI slop content as AI. But at the end of the day, this is content built. The thing that distinguishes slop is it's content built exclusively for engagement. The metric is, did the algorithm pick it up? Not, does anyone care about this tomorrow? And third is kind of this newer emerging phenomenon, and I always butcher the pronunciation, but it's sycophancy, which is, if you've used, ChatGPT or Claude or any of these tools recently, you're probably very familiar with being told you're right, or your outfit looks really good. Generative AI, which is becoming one of the defining tools of our moment, is really designed to flatter us. It's not designed to give us pushback or criticism. It's it's really just built to affirm our own ideas and maximize the amount of time we spend on the platform. And I know this all sounds a little bit grim, but the good news is that the rest of, this talk, which I'll try to wrap quickly, is really how to break these patterns and how to introduce, what we call productive friction into this kind of frictionless abyss. So in a world optimized for ease, the brands that introduce productive friction have the best chance to earn cultural currency. We define productive friction as strategic resistance or tension intentionally introduced into a system to generate attention, meaning, and value. In a world optimized for ease, a small moment of resistance, a little, wait, what is this? It's not just friction for friction's sake, just making things harder. It's about deliberate moves that signal intent, care, or conviction. Um, so now I want to basically transition into a couple of case studies that will kind of showcase again, like, brands that are deploying this productive friction in their own cultural program and how we can kind of view them through this framework. So So first off, we have a brand that, is likely very familiar if you spend any time in fashion or around the fashion industry. It's The Row, which is an American luxury label founded in 2005 by Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen. The Row started as this almost obsessive project. The perfect t-shirt is what they were originally built to kind of build. And it's evolved into, a full ready-to-wear line for menswear and women and kids. It's often described for context as the American Loro Piana or, a Phoebe Philo era Celine. It's extremely considered logoless. It is, if you've heard the phrase quiet luxury, you probably also heard the phrase the row very close by. And so I bring it up because I think, this is a brand that has done a really good job of understanding, what we call capturing the moment. Fashion shows, pull this up. Fashion shows were originally trade shows, buyers and editors in simple chairs with no cameras or theatrics. Today, a fashion runway is primarily a marketing event. The guest list, the front row, the red carpet casting, these are things that matter more than the clothing itself. So the row opts out of this. They say, what if we don't play this game? Their shows strip out the spectacle, and actually they ban phones from their shows. If you look at the row's Instagram, it doesn't actually feature any product. It simply shows, pieces of art and design objects that have inspired the brand. The brand's hero product, which is called the Margot bag, I think topped the list index for hottest products in the world for, almost a year. It was within the top five. The row responded by limiting distribution of the bag and, nearly pulling it out of circulation. So the brand, the row stands out in this way of like refusing to kind of be, participate in this viral ecosystem, and really, showing a lot of restraint in how people can discover the brand rather than just, making it easily accessible. Second case study, this might be a little bit less familiar. The brand is called AG1, which is a supplements brand based in the US. They're very popular podcast advertisers, so maybe you've heard about them there. Their positioning is around foundational nutrition. It's one scoop of powder that supports your gut health, your energy, and immunity. They, really position themselves as being science-led and systems-based. They're not just, a vibe or, another wellness product. These images come from their partnership with student scientists, research scientists. And so just for context, in the US, since 2021, the NCAA, which is the athletic group governing sports at universities in the US, has allowed athletes to sign what they call NIL deals, name and likeness partnerships. Typically, these deals go to athletes, mostly football players. In practice, it means that brands can pay 19-year-olds to pay to promote their products, appear in campaigns, wear their logos, etc. Most of that money usually flows to very visible college, athletes. But what AG1 did is they kind of reconstituted this idea of who gets to be an influencer. So rather than, they use the same NIL, name and likeness mechanism to sponsor early career researchers, students, young scientists who have no social followings. And the idea is that, this is essentially undermining the influencer marketing dynamic, or rather questioning the influencer marketing dynamic that is very familiar to anyone who's been on social media. Rather than saying someone who is the most visible or most followed uh, is going to represent our brand. We're going to work with people who represent the ideals and kind of the ultimate manifestation of what our product is trying to accomplish. Um, You guys may, I think, if anyone is in London, Anthropic recently opened the second iteration of their pop-up in collaboration with Airmail, which is the publication founded by the very storied editor Graydon Carter. If you are, at all familiar with what's going on in the AI space, obviously you're familiar with Anthropic, which was started by a group of ex-OpenAI researchers who basically asked, what if we built an AI company where safety and alignment weren't just PR, but part of the operating system? They have a whole mishugas about constitutional AI, and so to kind of like bring in the framework. Anthropic kind of, part of the moment, I think, is that this AI conversation that, everyone has, I think, had at this point. It tends to swing between two extremes. On one side, we say AI will do everything for you. On the other side, we say AI will end civilization, or AI will take everyone's jobs. But don't worry, it's just the boring jobs. Day to day, people are very tired of that conversation and, wading through AI slop and auto-generated content. Most AI branding leads into this kind of anxiety, and kind of like doom speak. Uh, Anthropic runs a really opposite playbook here. They're kind of like the tagline for this pop-up was keep thinking. And Airmail is, a bookstore that sells magazines and special edition books. They created a zero slop zone, a warm book-lined space with paper, with coffee, and hats that simply said thinking. You know, the invitation is basically come out and actually don't use our tool, don't use AI, but rather use Claude to go deeper, and really power your own thinking. The friction here is really against the default narrative of the category. Instead of automating your brain, Claude is there to really protect and extend it, rather than participate in this race for speed and scale. Anthropic is betting that the most valuable AI will be one that still leaves room, uh, you know, and for human thought and and friction, and human effort, the work required to still continue thinking. Um, the final case study I'm looking at is Duolingo, which has been, a social media star as a brand, I think for a good moment now. But, you know, a lot of people thought that that run was kind of coming to an end, right? So Duolingo, if you're not familiar, is one of the most popular language learning apps. Um, the reason that, I think they make a good case study for friction is because they engage in, what most brands would call unsafe brand, unbrand safe behavior. Most brand social content is engineered to be forgettable or, unfireable. Posts are clear, the tones are neutral, the jokes are safe. Everything is kind of calibrated to pass these filters of brand safety. Um, One of the things that I think defines our current moment is that like everyone is questioning whether your content is AI generated or, made by a person. One of the ways that I think Duolingo succeeds here is by uh, basically creating content that doesn't feel like it could be created by AI, partially because AI doesn't touch topics like, death or yeah, to be honest. And I think that there is a willingness to engage with risk, in how they present their brand that feels very human. This idea of being able to calculate risk. And yeah, so those are the case studies that I've kind of put forth. Um, I'm gonna skip ahead here and maybe we can go to questions since we only have 10 minutes. Or I'm happy to, yeah, I want to kind of make sure that we have time for those.
We should be able to stand another. We have another 20 minutes bar, so up to
Okay,
you.
great.
If you
Okay, great. So I'll take, so I guess I'll just, just to wrap, to kind of wrap up from where we're at. Um, you know, across our case studies here, um, we can really see the same pattern repeat. Each of these brands, to go back to our playbook, each of these brands is capturing the moment. They're thinking about how are cultural products discovered? Who are the people that assign value to a cultural product? Think about like AG1 saying, we're changing the notion of who can assign value here. And, what are the means of production? Is, for like a Duolingo or for an Anthropic, like everyone these days is questioning, what is real when they see their feeds. This ability to kind of assert your cultural product or your brand output as something that is built by human, that has a human component to it is still, that gives it a premium in our current moment. It may not always be the case, and that's part of the point as well, which is that the playbook will always change, but the framework can stay the same. And the idea is if you can adapt the framework, you can successfully build productive friction and you can successfully earn your cultural currency, which then allows you to do fun things like open a theater or start a record label, if you're if neither of those things are what people expect from you. So that's kind of yeah, that's about it.
Thank you very much. Anna, do you have some reflections for us on that, or do we just jump to questions? How would you like to kind of
I see a lot of questions, so I don't want to
Mhm.
keep too much, but I just like want to wrap this whole thing up and I say what I haven't mentioned at the beginning. So this is basically implications of what the framework I suggested at the beginning. What I did not mention is the world building that Barr expanded on here is basically in the examples of 824 and even to the certain extent the row is how consistency and coherence basically go hand in hand and how it's about intellectual property rather than sort of matching luggage plastering logos everywhere. It's about having the IP, having that one taste that is then applied as a filter on different categories. And that's basically how the brands grow now, through going through different non-adjacent categories and applying the point of view on the world. So wherever next 824 goes, and my recommendation to them was to go to a fashion brand, to peel off their silly merchandise and build the entire fashion brand as a point of view on the world because they have very well-defined edge there. And then in terms of other things that Barr pointed out, I would say again, like think about the brand as intellectual property and where that IP can be extended to. And then I would just allow people to ask their questions now.
Great. Thank you very much, Bar. Thank you very much, Anna. Let's just jump straight into them. And then if I actually miss anything here, please don't mind. Just just nudge me up and say, hey, you missed my question up there somewhere. But I think I'll start with Emily's question here, which I think is it's a very good starting point about it's great. All of this is great. How does that apply to my case? How do I translate that into a kind of a smaller scale or something closer to my reality here? So for those not seeing the question here, let me just read it for you. As a small, medium business with a very small marketing brand and marketing or brand budget, what will be your starting points for building cultural moments? As a definition, we are in the specialist and fine food scene with a unique selling point. So product is strong. How do we start?
Anna, do you want to take it or should I?
Well, for me, I mean, I think you should go, but I'll just set for it, it's even easier if you're a small brand because then you have a tighter community. And I think, Barry, you're well positioned to answer this question because you work particularly with smaller brands.
Yeah, I think the framework, the reason again that it's a framework is it's meant to be adaptable. And I Anna's right, I worked for I helped build an independent beverage brand based in New York. And if I think about how this framework would apply then, we did, you know, a lot of things that I think in the moment were not expected. The brand was coming out of COVID, and so we placed a heavy emphasis on live events, which sounds really simple, but it was at a time when, coming back, it was at a time when experiential was kind of a lot of people were kind of writing the kind of the funeral speeches for experiential as a space. We placed a big bet on retail at the time, and we did a lot of partnerships with our retail partners to build collateral, even things like in-store displays, and things that looked really special in store at a time when retail again was not in a good place. I think you know the kind of the framework is really about kind of zigging when there's zagging and finding something specific to your category that you can contradict. In terms of more like brand activity, the brand which you can look up, it's on social, it's Ruby for fun. We built an entire universe with an insane narrative that was kind of this intergalactic space narrative, and the idea was to try to build, something that people could invest in and spend time on, which is not typically how people think. At least at the time, it wasn't really how people were building CPG brands. There was a lot more of this emphasis on, transactional and acquisition marketing. So I think like the the I think the framework is adaptable in this context. I think yeah, I guess that's how I put it.
Thank
I
you.
would just say
Oh,
also content curation, collaborations, and community. Those four C's, they don't go away regardless of the scale you apply them at. Nothing prevents a small business of having a very considered content program. Doesn't prevent from curating. Doesn't prevent of collaborating. It doesn't prevent of building your community. So again, go back to what is your intellectual property? What do you truly own, and apply those four C's. Like the scale is different, but the approach is really the same.
great. Bar, I would ask you just for Christina Kirsch here, if you don't mind just passing parking for a second on the friction matrix page, just so Christina can have a look at that as we line up the next question would be great. Um, there we go. Thank you very much. So there's a question from Uzo, which I wonder if it is on the take the most shots point that you guys were making before, but in your experience, is there a good way to know if productive friction, sorry, that you decide to go with, if that will resonate with the zeitgeist or not? Like if just friction for the friction's sake is probably not the thing here. So how can you kind of predict or calculate or control? Culture is a complicated beast, right? So what are the mechanisms here to know the bets you're making?
You want to go or should I? I'll start. So I think the simple answer is no. There's no way to know what will work. And that's partially, to your point, Hugo, around the kind of shots on goal concept. Anna in her Substack talks a lot about a portfolio approach. And part of that is, and part of the idea of building a cultural program is to hedge, at any given moment in the same way that like you think about channel strategy where, one day, Google SEO organic SEO might be your best channel, the other, it might be paid, and you have to kind of balance your spend and attention across each of these platforms. Like cultural programming and productive friction in this context is exactly the same. I think, you have some bets that will require more investment and time and some things that are as small as taking a few more risks in your social media content the way that Duolingo does, creating a more analog aesthetic that kind of contradicts the category norm as Anthropic did. There's small ways to test these things and kind of focus group them. But at the end of the day, if there's a reliable way to know how these things would be successful or not, it would be a different ball game.
Yeah, nobody knows anything, and that's why the whole point is to have a portfolio of cultural products. Anthropic clothing could have bombed completely. It didn't. Like Starbucks barista cup could have gone unnoticed. It caught them unawares. It was the drop that was like their cultural moment. So this is not to say, oh, don't do anything because you don't know what's going to work. The alternative is to do non-stop sequels, to do non-stop slop. That is worse than death. It's the death like by freezing. You don't know that you are dead. So the point is the whole of a media approach that I was talking about at the beginning is to do a lot to see what cultural contexts are going to be the most fertile. You're not going to go in advance, but you're going to release in multiple contexts, and you're going to see who the early winners are, and you're going to amplify those. In cultural industries, you cannot predict in advance because cultural industries are shaped by taste. Taste is unpredictable because we are influenced by each other. Social influence is unpredictable. So in order to sort of influence, social influence, the number of bets and the number of contexts you see is all about the amplification and monitoring which context is the most fertile than others and killing the duds early on.
Great. I see there's a juicy question here from Nurhan about brands that flop, right? The reverse case studies. But let's go back to this in a second because I see a few different ways of perhaps taking questions that take a look more not towards what your output, what you project into the world, but how do you deal with that internally, right? So companies that could be, there's a question here from Pallavi about B2B SaaS companies, for instance, how they move towards that. Espana is also asking something similar about how do you build a cultural program internally. And also, I think we have a comment from Leo that I will kind of put in the same context here. How do you build that with the understanding of internally, right? Like, does that mean that the soil in the company needs to be ready for you to plant on it? You need people to understand it. How do you take others in that journey? How do you have conversations with people about that, about things like what you just say now? And I'm like, you don't know the result. I cannot promise you anything. I cannot draw a line and say, if you do this, that will happen. How are those conversations in your experience internally with the teams to be able to equip themselves to start thinking about this?
First of all, like I'll tackle that because this is about organizational transformation. Most companies are not set up for that because they're mostly siloed. And I've seen that firsthand, and that's where I started this talk. I started from organizational transformation and the need to create one unified process. And that process is that usually in companies, those who create ideas are separate from those who commercialize ideas, which means those who come up with ideas, the creatives, the marketers, are separate from those who are selling those ideas, from retail channel planners and CFOs and so on. So if you can't sell idea when you come up with it, you shouldn't come up with ideas because then that means you're like working at art school and so on. So that's is changing. Everyone who comes up with ideas needs to think about how is this idea going to live in the real world and how is that idea going to make money, which means if you're designing products, clothes, you need to know, oh, is it merchandisable? Is it going to sell? How is it going to look on Instagram? How is it going to look in physical stores? How is it going to look online? If you're coming up with campaigns, you need to ask, how is it going to look on Instagram? Is it going to increase click-through rate? How is it going to look online? How is it going to look in visual merchandising, in store windows, and so on? So basically, companies are realizing now that it's not about the structure, it's about the process. So yes, a lot of them are transforming and smaller companies are better positioned. But this is not to say that big ones are not also realizing. A lot of them are trying to change their hierarchical nature to faster moving, more flatter structure. It's a process. I mean, I was able, as someone who is in C-suite, to change that. But unless you're not empowered by that executive power, it's a longer time horizon.
Thank you. Definitely agree with that. If you have top of your mind a quick one before we jump to the last question about the flops, anything that is interesting just to mention here? Like brands that try to make a move here, try to play in that space, and their cultural, they just misread the moment, or they something that it just flopped in a way.
You know what? Like we can come up with shit examples, but I don't think that's fair because based on everything that we said, trying is better than not trying. So the worst thing is not doing anything. And I would say uh for brands, they say, oh, we want, like the verse is saying, oh, we want to influence culture. You don't say we want to influence culture. You just sort of do that. And if you misread culture, that means you just have work to do, you know? But even that is better than not even doing. So, I mean, that's sort of like, I'm not nice. I'm just saying like doing something is better than doing nothing. But I'll let Barr maybe be more critical. You're mute, Barr. You're a mute.
Sorry. No, I think that's like right on point. I think there's so many brands that, even that Anna and I have worked with or that I've spoken to, they're so paralyzed. And I think to even like offer criticism towards someone, a brand that's trying to be a part of culture is like almost like contributes to that paralysis. And the reality is, part of, if you fail, you become part of, this smooth brain society culture that I've talked about, and no one remembers anyways. I think that like the reality is the additive benefit of, playing, to earn cultural currency of playing in that arena is that it's huge, like we mentioned, the benefits allow you to, enter a new category or, achieve higher brand loyalty. But the downsides are not so bad. It's actually somewhat asymmetric. The downsides, for the most part, just mean being forgotten, being reduced to content. That's where you were most likely in the first place, anyways. So I think it's
Correct.
actually, the
Yes.
asymmetric benefit of, this kind of programming is part of why it's so valuable.
It
Thank
is.
you.
And I mean, you can say, oh, like in the US, when American Eagle Outfitters did like Sydney Sweeney bad, good jeans, oh, that was like blah, blah. It lasted for 1 second. Their stock price went up. It went very quickly down. There was a lot of buzz. Did it impact sales? I don't know. Who cares? Maybe. Okay. But like the point is, even when you try and do something and it's in cultural conversation for a moment, it's not the point. The best and the worst, it's not the point. The point is cultural program, which is to keep doing, to create a snowball effect. When you do one thing that amplifies the next and the next and the next, that's sort of the thing. So you would need to do truly bad things for a really long period of time to really warrant an answer. And Barry and I worked with a brand this summer that literally pulled the plug like a week before, like a photo shoot, and paid for it just because they were too scared to do something different. So you know what I
Oh,
mean? Just compare those two scenarios.
sure. Um, I will ask the last question here, and then I'll also thank you guys for your time after this one. So, do you think, and this for both of you, don't know if who of you wants to take that one, it's from Christina Kish. Do you think communities will have success setting access to their culture and their members as a way to jumpstart the brand's cultural relevance, maybe like FaZe Clan or Friends with Benefits, FWB? How that relationship might form in terms of access and participation there?
I can start, which is that I'm not familiar with FaZe Clan, but I am familiar with FWB, and my understanding is that, they are kind of emerged from this you know, excitement around NFTs and some kind of like and kind of initially was conceptualized as, being very connected to crypto. Um, I think that I don't think you can sell access to culture or community. I think that's just it's a little bit of an oxymoron. But I think you can I think it's really about like the initial impetus for it. I don't think you can build a culture that around a community that you have to pay to be a part of. Maybe the ultimate example of that would be Soho House, or members clubs. I wouldn't say that these are communities that are incredibly additive to culture in any way. And part of that is the paid kind of barrier to being a part of them. But I think once you build a community organically, you can charge for access for it. I think there is I think it's really I don't think that that kind of undermines it, but I think it's about, being intelligent about how you do so. So, A24 is another good example here with their membership program, which, gives you access to special products and early drops. They already had, if you go on the A24 Reddit, it's one of the most passionate Reddits around, right? They already have this ravenous fan base. And so then they have a right to kind of charge for access to it. But I don't think if they had started, if they had gone the other way around and started with a paid membership program, I doubt they would have inspired that level of, brand excitement and loyalty.
Great.
Oh,
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your knowledge here. Thanks, everybody, for being here as well. Everybody that came to this one. And if you've been watching later at home, thank you for watching this. We are going to prepare a little report or a little kind of reflections on what we learned throughout these conversations, these webinars in this year. That report will probably come out early next year in January in our channel, so keep an eye out for that. And of course, you have all the reason in the world to follow Barr and Anna's work on their channels wherever they publish stuff, because as you can tell, it's really interesting and thought-provoking things about mapping out the landscape as it is out there for us today. So thank you very much, everyone. Good evening for those that are on this time zone. Good afternoon for those in the others, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thanks for having us.
us.
Bye bye.